Ok, pues vamos a empezar.
Okay, so we're going to start. Welcome. It's great to see you here. Great that you could attend. This is a gathering in the framework of Rizoma Festival. It is a film, art, music festival with exhibitions, etc. And each year we work with a different topic that changes. This year we are going to work with Doppelgänger. It is a German word that means double, and Ganger, walker. So the walker who walks beside you. It is a concept that has been in our collective awareness since the beginning of time. In literature, in painting, in art, even in the Egyptian alphabet, there was a symbol that represented your double in a different universe. I think it is quite amazing. For one reason or another, it's always been present. And today we have several artists who are participating in the festival, and together we're going to be talking about this concept. I'm going to continue introducing artists in Spanish, and then we will talk English. So in order, we have two filmmakers who are presenting feature films. Michael Tyburski, to my right, has directed The Sound of Silence. We premiered it last night at Cineteca, and it's going to be shown this afternoon at 6:30. I can't remember exactly, 6 or 6:30 here at Fundación. And Jay Alvarez has directed a film called Dizzy Pursuit, who will be projected today and tomorrow. They are part of a new section of the festival, Contemporary International Surrealism. Both have this surrealistic approach, in my opinion. Then we will have time to talk about their works. And then we have two other artists. Both have alter egos in this world of parallel universe doppelgangers. Miss Beige, I say that she's Anna Smith's alter ego. She is an artist who lived for many years in London. She's before coming back to Spain, a character was born called Miss Beige. Miss Beige doesn't talk. She is denounces things that she doesn't like, and she's a fighter through silence and aesthetics. She has an amazing Instagram. If you don't follow her, I recommend you to do so, because she has incredible aesthetic and narrative messages in her Instagram. And then we also have Rob Roth, a multidisciplinary artist. He works in several areas. His alter ego is called Craig, and Craig is dogman who has been rejected by society. He has special effects with regard to how he dresses. He doesn't speak. He's mute. This is something that we will mention further along. And he sings new wave 80s songs. He has a melancholic tone, a call to lost dreams, a lost life, and he's will have his performance on Sunday at 1 p.m. at Matadero. I highly recommend his work. I've been trying to collaborate with him for many years, and thanks to Fundación and Espacio Telefónica, he's here. He will be here this afternoon too, and I really recommend his work too. There will be a conference this afternoon at 7, and he's also going to be giving a master class in Casa Encendida on Sunday at 5 p.m. So this is the presentation. We're going to now watch the trailer of the festival, and then we will switch to English. We're going to be establishing dialogue between us, and then we will open a Q&A session for everyone.
Okay, we're passing on to English now. Has anyone learned any Spanish yet since their arrival? Well, we're going to go first in order and talk a little bit about the work that you're presenting at this festival, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about Doppelgänger as a theme. So our first two filmmakers here, they're not so much invited for the Doppelgänger theme. They're here because of the contemporary surrealist section of our festival. So we're going to first talk about their films. The Sound of Silence is Michael's first feature film. It has wonderful actors in it, and it's a beautiful script, and it's won some awards. Will you tell us about the awards you've won and the short film that led to you creating the feature?
Yeah, well, we opened at Sundance in January, where it was well received, and we the path to get there. It started as a short film 6 years prior that also screened at that festival. So it was a nice, I suppose, kind of long road home in a way. And during those ensuing years, as the feature script got developed, the movie concerns sound. The narrative is about an individual who's kind of obsessed with sound and thinks about sound and our relationship to sound in our everyday lives in a unique way. And we had submitted the script to a grant that the Dolby Foundation, the company Dolby, gives to independent films that really, budgets for sound, unfortunately, are usually kind of scrapped first, and there's little money left over to mix a film when you're done. And I think because our film happened to be about sound, and they knew that we really, needed that to sell that kind of invisible character, they gave us a grant that allowed us to, from the script phase, mix the film in this technology called Dolby Atmos, which is very fancy technology for a small film. But also allowed us to communicate with sound designers early on in the process to be thinking about sound in the approach before actually going into production, which is amazing because usually you don't have those sort of resources, and allowed us to mix the film as if it was a very big film.
What did you learn about sound in the process that you hadn't known already?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, it's sound I always think about as when you make movies, it's a very visual medium, but there's also this other component that, when it's sound designers usually like to say, you want to feel it and not hear it in terms of sound. And it is this kind of invisible, part of the experience. But it can really affect you, and it can be used to manipulate an audience or bring out a certain emotion at times. But it's a funny thing that you can't really put your finger on. So I learned, I suppose, how to experiment more with sound. At one kind of the main character in the film kind of hears things others cannot, and to get inside. A character's head, I suppose. I learned that it's more about removing sounds sometimes than adding a lot of sounds. There's one approach where you can add kind of a cacophony of noises to communicate stress or some sort of challenge a character is going through. But it's interesting, if you remove all sound or maybe narrow it down to one, that can sometimes be a more powerful punch, I suppose. So it's always kind of finding that balance.
I heard recently of I don't know what to call it really, but it's like a soundproof room in Germany somewhere that's supposed to have absolute zero silence, like the negation of sound completely, and that it's very stressful to be in the space, that people don't last for more than like 15 or 20 minutes in this space of utter silence.
Well, they call those anechoic chambers, and it's anechoic. And what's interesting is that you can go inside these rooms that are supposed to be devoid of sound and maybe experience true silence, so to speak. But they found that when you go in, you actually end up hearing, your nervous system and even the blood flowing through your veins because it's so quiet. And so I like to think that, even in true silence, you still can't escape yourself. So is there a true thing as silence, or what does that mean? I think that silence is sometimes full of noise.
And how has this filmmaking process been for you? You have wonderful actors in your film, and you wrote the script yourself?
I wrote it with a friend of mine. We co-wrote it, and it's I was discussing with Jay earlier. Like, filmmaking it's a long process, but I think it sometimes needs to be. These things are with you for a long time, and you make them over a period of time, and then you screen them, but you're also prepping them. So it's fulfilling in a lot of ways. It's exhausting, but I think exhausting in the best ways. I was very fortunate to, even though it was my first feature, get it to very talented actors that I had really hoped to work with. And I think it all really comes down to a script, and if you have a good story and it resonates with the right people, I think there's always a road or a path to get things made. It just takes a lot of tenacity, because it's a marathon. Things happen over time, and then things can move very quickly. But I always find that if you really stick with something long enough, you can almost kind of will it into being.
That's for sure. I found out yesterday that Michael was raised in a small cabin in the woods in a small village in the very north of Vermont, close to the border with Canada. And I was wondering if, being raised in the countryside, you were aware of the silence around you, if that affected your filmmaking, you think, or...
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I suppose I grew up in I'd like to think a very quiet place. It's just inherently quiet because it's so rural and you're away from other people. There's more natural sounds, and I've lived in New York City now for well over a decade, and it's obviously the polar opposite. And I think when you live in a city, and not unique to New York, but any kind of a place with a lot of the people around, and technology, there's going to be sounds, and there's no good way to solve this issue and to get rid of noise. But I'm constantly kind of thinking about, well, how are sounds in certain environments affecting us? Because we all have a relationship with sound, whether we're whether we acknowledge it or not. I do subscribe to the theories that the character in my film has, and it's just how we address it. And I think we all have mechanisms to cope with sound and how we deal with it, and that's really what it comes down to. There's an archival clip that opens my film, and it's from this group that was called the Noise Abatement Commission, that was recorded in 1929, and it was at a time close to a century ago where it was already something people were thinking about in cities, that noise, just kind of post the Industrial Revolution, noise is a problem, and how is this affecting our health? And we use that in the film to show that close to 100 years have gone by, and it's only gotten worse. The city has obviously only gotten noisier. And, now we have things like noise canceling earbuds and white noise machines. I sleep with a white noise machine next to my bed to just kind of drown out the city sounds as much as you can. But it's just, I think the first step to coping with it is just acknowledging that sound is a presence in our life, and we need to address it.
For better, for worse, it's there. We have to appreciate it more. Like, sometimes
that's right.
We don't actually... you can actually force your ear to listen more in this direction or that direction. We don't always train it that way.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm really glad you're in Madrid. And Jay here is a filmmaker who this is his second feature that he's presenting. His first feature, we also screened at Rizoma. I think it was awarded at Slam Dance, is that right? Mm-hmm. And that year, our festival theme was playing with like the fusion of analog and digital. And Jay's first feature film has all of the characters speaking on telephones the entire film, and cell phones and landlines, and the character in the scene is always on the phone at some point, and so that's why it drew our attention. And it's a very poetic, lyrical film. I really loved it. And his second film, Dizzy Pursuit, is in the same vein of I think a very, very original script where you're in a world that feels realistic and feels normal, but it's slightly off. So talk to us a little bit about what your writing process is like and where your ideas come from. Good morning.
Yeah. Most of my thinking in response to these questions is how to deflect the notion of autobiography. So my first impulse is to elaborate on that strategy. But it definitely includes some sort of response to unfortunately lived experience. The second film was based off of a familiarity with a casting process and familial obligations that don't marry well. So that was the impetus for writing the second film. We shot it entirely in one room, which was the resident of my producer friend, and it was so small that we needed to displace him throughout the entire shoot. It takes place in an urban environment, a very small, squalid urban apartment that he lived in, and for the duration of the shoot, because of all the equipment we needed to remain in the residence, he and his fiancée were forced to live or sleep exclusively in a storage cage that's in the basement level of the apartment building. And his fiancée was teaching humanities class to very querulous, very poorly behaved high school students at the time. So she would come home from fretting over teenagers to grade papers with a flashlight in the storage compartment of their basement, and it's not allowed to live in the storage compartment of the basement. So when people would come in the very early mornings to get their bikes, because some people would store their bikes there, we had to block off the visibility of my producer and his fiancée with cardboard boxes until each of the bicyclists left.
Are they still together?
Are they still friends with you?
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that association. They're not still together, but I'd like to submit that it's very independent of the production. I think they both know it's for the best, and I wish them happy independent paths.
Sorry, just had to go through.
When we started to edit the film, one conflict arose because our editor had relocated to Los Angeles, and we shot the film in Portland, Oregon, and we all lived there. And so we didn't have any means by which to relocate. I ended up in the home of a very beautiful middle-aged divorcee. But my producer didn't have any place to stay and temporarily needed to shower at the 24-hour fitness in Los Angeles. He was essentially homeless, and it was a really bad time for that because in Skid Row, various Los Angeles gangs had infiltrated Tent City. They were using the tents as a way to evade police intrusion. So it was a really turbulent environment to be homeless in. But eventually he found assistance from someone who essentially lived in a trailer, but was very generous and made space for them in his trailer, and has since found an apartment. But it was a really difficult transition to Los Angeles. Some of us more so than others.
And how long have you been living in Los Angeles now?
For a couple of years now.
And is it affecting your work already? So your two first films were written when you were living
in Portland. Yeah, I think just the size of the population is affecting my work, and that's what I'm attracted to. I'm at home in claustrophobic places. I think my producer's fiance wasn't.
I think you have your third film, actually, from this story.
So you act in both of your films. You act as well.
Yeah.
And do you act for other people as well, or only for yourself?
It hasn't been a focus. The writing and directing and producing of the films have been so demanding and miserable that I haven't been able to act in other people's films. But at some sort of future abstract phase of leisure, I'd like to. Yeah.
And I also think that your poster designs are always like is that your writing there with the poster designs?
Oh yeah,
is that your handwriting?
No, that's Megan Kopp's. She writes the most of the text, and then Pat Gibson is the graphic designer.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we pass on to the alter egos, I did want to talk with both of you a little bit about the state of independent filmmaking in the U.S. these days, and the festival path, if that's still a valid path to get your work out there, if you feel like it's changing at a rapid pace, or if it's like there's a new model now with all of the streaming options out there. I don't know. I feel like in the 90s, independent filmmaking had its boom, and there was like a real process to save all your money, get your film made, and then you could sell it and get the funding back, and it could lead to theatrical. I feel like your film basically had that model, but I don't know if you feel this great divide between the commercial content and the independent content. Is that a divide that's just getting wider and wider, or?
I mean, I think, I look at, I don't know how much has changed. I've only, this is my first time screening a feature at a festival, but it's I love festivals, here included, just because it's a way to be able to screen your, movie, to audiences and theaters, which I think there's so many ways to watch movies now, which is a good thing, and access things. Certainly I can watch movies now that I wasn't able to access growing up, in Vermont. There was only kind of one way to watch movies then, but now, there's a lot of ways, and I appreciate the curation of festivals. It's certainly not, there's a lot of films being made, and it kind of hopefully is an entry point for some audiences to find, okay, well, there's this sort of films being made, and these films speak to me, and I can find them better that way. But yeah, I think it's just always great to be able to share work in a live environment. I think is really important for movies.
Yeah, in the dialogue afterwards.
Certainly.
What's your sentiment?
My experience has been a little bit more sordid, and so I think it's. But I don't resent a previous era with which I'm familiar, mainly through like nauseatingly nostalgic retrospection of other people. So I don't really know how to assess something I didn't live through. But my experience making films has been maintained more by a supportive spouse and close group of collaborators than it has a market that seems to have disappeared, at least for work with a radicalism that resembles mine. So I don't know how to assess it with much accuracy beyond the fact that I do recognize there has been a shift in landscape that I'm part of.
Well, it's good to be a part of it. I hope you keep being a part of it, both of you.
Thanks.
So we're going to pass on here to Miss Beige. Now, you all don't know her work, but does Miss Beige understand English? Yeah. Well, it's true. I just wanted to make sure. I wasn't so sure. And so I think this is in Alicante or Benidorm, maybe Benidorm. And I love, there's really only one man looking at her here. You'd think that they would all be looking at her, but there's just the one. And this is her with a group of other beige fans that came to support her, and they all got together. I think there's a celebration of beige as a neutral color, but can still have strength in the neutrality. This is a great photo. She's got wonderful images, and she's always looking for a contrast, but in my mind, it's never forced. There's always something very natural about the contrast that she finds. And, you know, she never speaks, so it's nice to have her here, but I wish that she could share with us a little bit. Maybe Rob can share with us a little bit. With his alter ego, also doesn't speak, so I feel like
I can sing though.
You can sing. Yeah. That's true. Let's look at. Oh, look! Here's a wonderful beige moment. This is one day a year when all of the pastors bring all the sheep through the downtown Madrid. So the cities of Madrid are filled with sheep. It's I always forget the date, but it's a one. And so this is Craig, and here we have Craig performing in New York City. And this is the detail work. I mean, how did you create this character? What was the birth of Craig?
Honestly, it was a long process. It started, I don't even remember what year I really started it, and it's had many incarnations, and eventually you find the person to collaborate with who is, you know, this is a great FX artist named Jacqueline Vallega, who makes, essentially they're a bunch of wigs. Mm-hmm. It's not like a mask that you just put on, it's many pieces, and that's how you can, I was always trying to find a way to articulate my face better with emotion, and if it's a solid mask you can't, but if it's all glued you can kind of do more with it. So that's kind of, but it started it was a terrible start, like horrible versions, and essentially he was a mask for me to perform. That is really the impetus, like the very, very, very beginning of me getting on stage. And I just needed to become an alter ego. And it developed and developed, and then I realized that he was the shadow self. And his story became much more developed, and he became part of another show that I was directing called The Mystery of Clay Woman, which was about a 500 million year old woman. I have to remember if it's 500 or 800 million, because there's a big difference. And he was her sidekick. And so I would answer her questions in song, and now they split up, and now he's an independent performer.
But that's interesting what you say, that it started as a mask for you, like you felt the need to start performing, but you wanted to take that step as a character.
It helped me. I mean, a lot of people do it even in rock. They become a character, you know, it helps to become this other, particularly singing, I think, but some people don't, but it helped me, and it's still going for some insane reason.
And have you garnered insight as to, you know, why a wolf man and not a lizard, or?
Well, I never, he's furry and cuddly, you know. I mean, the funny thing about it is and the costume, which I'll talk about in one of the master classes I'm giving, is that it has deteriorated also, and that's the point of it. The costume falls apart. It smells. I mean, I do have to get the fur redone every so often, but I like it getting more matted and more. And the more deconstructed it is, the better. So it kind of actually works in a real time. The more I do it, the more it becomes like the real thing.
The more you fuse together a bit more.
Yeah.
And talk to us a little bit about your artwork. I mean, Rob does such a wide range. He's also a very talented animator and designer and director, and he's worked with a lot of great artists and musicians. He's on tour right now with Blondie, basically, with Debbie Harry, basically. And he's also a director. Tell us a little bit about your creative path. And
oh my God, it's been. But I actually never, to be honest, it's all the same to me. I've always said this. Everyone's like, oh, you do so much, and it's like it's all every medium I approach exactly the same way, which is by being a painter. That's how I look at everything, whether it's film, theater, sound. I did sound installations. I've done so. It doesn't, and it's probably because I'm just interested in different. I'm like, oh, what's that? Or how can I articulate this idea? Maybe it's not a film. It would be better served. There was a documentary kind of idea for this nightlife project I did, and I realized that it had to be a sound installation, that it couldn't be the classic talking head documentary style, which I feel is somewhat dead. It serves its purpose. For something like that, it had to feel immersive. You had to feel like you were at a dinner party and it was the conversation. And it would overlay of people saying, almost like past the, remember that? You know? She's not enjoying this at all, but it's hard to tell if she's really, maybe she's giddy inside about it. I don't know, but we'll see. I feel like I'm an analyst actually sitting next to her, but so it doesn't matter what the medium is. I always approach it the same way. I mean, I'm interested in a lot of things, so it's kind of a problem.
And oftentimes you start working an idea and it just takes you in a different direction. Like you think it's going to be a theater piece, and then you surprise yourself. And
many projects inform another project. If you look, I mean, it's not intentional. When you look back now, it's like even Craig started as a mask, but then he went into another show because she needed a sidekick, and then the sidekick needed to talk, and I was like, well, maybe it's, song, and then that led to him being his own thing, and it might be a film. We're working on trying to make it a visual album. So they all inform each other, and that's when sound really started for me, and I'm working with like more sound installations and music. I wrote all of the music for this piece called Soundstage, and I wrote all of the music. I mean, not the actual notes, but the lyrics.
Yeah, this is Soundstage here, which you're also going to talk about later this afternoon.
Yeah. So
with Rebecca Hall. Is this
yes,
the
that's
actress?
Rebecca Hall. And Soundstage was one of the true amalgamations of everything I do. There's film pieces, there's theater. I wrote the music. I'm in it. I was never supposed to be in it without a mask. So, well, character mask. But so that was kind of the project, the last big project I did that kind of amalgamated everything together.
You presented this in New York a year ago, is that right?
Yeah, at Here Arts Center, through their residency program, artist in residency program, and it was a 4-year development to the final piece in a long hall. I'd aged not well through that.
You're talking about masks. I learned recently that the word sincere, sincera in Spanish, sincere, comes from the birth of Greek theater, that the word sincera, it's without wax in English, in Spanish. And actors in Greek theater would wear masks made out of wax. So to be sincere is to be without a mask, basically. Yeah. No, it's. I try to spread that. I like to share that. And so, why do you think people like to create alter egos, or do you think everybody has them, even if they don't work them out? They always have their side character, who they wish they were, or who they
look at
are
Instagram.
Glad they are.
I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I do believe that we have sides. We have many sides, I think, and I think there's sometimes dualities of just these alter ego. It's kind of the oldest story, really, if you think about it, and the wild side, the secret side, the hidden side. And I'm always fascinated by that. A lot of my work, I'm really interested. I read like Freud and all of these psychology papers and stuff about these ideas. And I'm always wondering, when you say sincere, it's like, is it? There's no mask, but are you yourself? Is anyone themselves? And I mean, in Soundstage, there's a whole, it takes place in a ambiguous time, but I say it's like 1980 to 84, because it's all about, he's obsessed with this fictitious movie star, and it's his obsessive look at all of her films on videotape, and it's his safe world, so he can emulate her, and it's this other. It's a fantasy, but is it more true self through another? And the whole point of that show was, is she made up? Is she even real? And is she making him up? There's a whole idea of this other dimension where she lives in only films, and he goes into the films as characters and then is live on stage. But I always said that she could be making him up somewhere and being like, there's this man who thinks that I'm fantastic. You know, so it's all these kind of mirrors. There's a lot of things about mirrors in my work, and reflection and re-reflection and fracturing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we can all agree that there's many sides to all of ourselves, and Doppelgänger makes it sound like there's just the one, like there's that one other person that is your set mirror, but in reality there's probably several.
I was thinking today too that Doppelgänger, I'm staying in an apartment of Gabrielle's friend, and it's like the doppelganger of this apartment that I cat sit in Brooklyn Heights. There's a cat, it has a outdoor thing, the cat goes out, and they're filmmakers, and I texted, it's actually Rebecca Hall's play, and I was like, I am staying in the doppelganger of your existence in Brooklyn Heights. It's really funny. I was like, oh, a doppelganger could be a space. It doesn't have to be an actual person. It can be like it's almost like these dimensions, you know. Are we living similar lives, not just we look alike? Yeah. It's like, are we living similar existences that are down to like the size of your room and stuff? I don't know. This is how I think.
No, it's true though. I mean, have you ever had any experiences like the sentiment of Doppelgänger?
I think that a fundamental quality of the egotist is not to find an equal. So there may be a delusion of idiosyncrasy that prevents one from seeing oneself in other people, even if it's there.
There's this funny thing that I still haven't met him. For years, people in New York told me, oh, you have a doppelganger. I've seen him. And I was like, I do. It's like, yeah, and my cousin ran into a ATM. It was like, Rob, and she's like, I thought it was you. And I was like, who is this person and why have I not run into that? And it keeps happening. It's very strange. And then I'm just thinking it's actually me and they're just like ignoring me or something.
They didn't quite realize
But
it.
I have yet to, it happens consistently over like every couple of years. I'll be like, I saw you, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I have one in New York, supposedly.
And, you know, now I always think with Doppelganger theme, like this idea of parallel universes, and I feel like it's extremely present nowadays in a lot of series about dystopias, and that somehow we're reflecting a lot about the society that we live in right now and what it could be for better, for worse. And I don't know how you feel like this is something that's just growing more. I feel like it's much more present nowadays, and like it's a trend now of imagining other worlds. More so than other eras.
I also find every city's becoming like every other city. There's a constant, which I don't like. Travel, I was always interested in like, oh, this city. And I find more and more as time goes on, each city becomes a version of another. It's like this Beijing town of... I don't know. That's what
it's true. There is an aspect to globalization that everything becomes a lot more homogenous, and so people try to hold on to any minute detail that could be an aberration.
I also find this about feeling, for people in general, to feel familiar about something or safe, and it's very strange. I have the opposite reaction. I feel completely unsafe and freaked out when it's like, what's happening to
when everything's the same.
Paris, or you know, it's funny.
No, absolutely.
I think about a lot, you know, even though cities are all becoming kind of the same and similar, but I'm always interested in looking at the past, and it's interesting, you know, in European cities, the past is much more present, obviously, in younger American cities, but even in places like New York, you know, we're building on top of the past constantly, and you know, you can literally find the cracks in the street and see kind of the previous iteration. I'm always searching for that, and the work and the films that I've created is, I suppose I like aesthetically how the past looked in a city like New York too, and it's also something we're like sound. We're living amongst, and we whether we're aware of it or not. I think about a lot of the times, in New York City apartments, and maybe apartments everywhere. Usually, when one tenant moves out, another one moves in, but the landlord's required to just add a layer of paint. So in a way, we're kind of all living amongst many layers of the past physically, and I think about that a lot, and how the past is affecting the present.
It's true. There are all these layers. There's an artist who works with walls and looks for the DNA of a wall, and they chip through and they go through all the layers, and they make the artwork out of the different layers of paint in the wall, and that's the DNA of that wall. And it's an interesting concept.
Did you? I just forgot. I wanted to ask you this for Doppelgänger theme. Did you look into Genesis P. Arge's work? Do you know who Genesis P. Arge is? He's like the founder of industrial music, and one of the projects that you call them they, did is he met a woman named Lady J, and they were so in love that they were actually having surgeries to become each other, and they wanted to be one. And she unfortunately passed away from cancer at the sort of towards the end of it. But there's this whole documentation of it that's really fascinating about trying to become the same person. Wow. I didn't know how far they were gonna go. We never found the end of it, but it just popped into my head, this doppelganger idea. Because I was also thinking about surgery, plastic surgery. Now there's a lot of faces that look alike now. Everyone's kind of morphing into these similar faces, and it's celebrated.
It's celebrated.
It's just kind of like, oh wow, she looks like her, or him. It's interesting.
It's true. I want to have the audience feel comfortable to share if you have your own doppelganger that you want to share, or
are there
if you have any
here?
questions or comments, please feel free to join the conversation. I think that there's also something about doppelganger in its literal translation, that's the double that walks by your side, where it's your conscience in some ways, and that we always have that voices that speak to us, and it could be the evil twin or your cheerleader who guides you through. And I think that's part of the doppelganger as well, and that's part of why it's always been in history since the beginning. That we've always had a conscious. Ever since we've had a conscious, we've been aware of who we are from the inside and from the outside, and that person's walking by our side and oftentimes can criticize or support, and that's part of it, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Would you like to share anything? We have a question. Yeah.
So I have a question for the alter egos. Is it like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation where you can't control it, or can you control it? Have you ever been scared of just sticking in one role and not moving away from it, or not being able to go back to your, I guess, true being, which I like your...
Is that for me?
For both. I mean, she doesn't speak. Maybe you could not.
I can speak for her, but I don't. I could throw my voice.
No, but maybe Miss Beige cannot. Like, is it something you control? Or you don't? Okay. So maybe it's just for you. The question's just for you.
Well, I'll... my alter ego, Craig, I don't ever feel like worried about taking over. The Jekyll and Hyde thing is a very funny comment, because one of Craig is like there's many kind of things you could talk about him, but one of them is the misunderstood monster, like from monster movies, literally, like the Wolfman, and I always think of Frankenstein with the child, like, and when he throws her in, like, and the town running after him. And for me, that actually is an analogy of the queer experience growing up and being the other and being ostracized and pitchforked out of town. And so that's why the music I chose for it is what it is. But I don't know if I'm answering your question as far as it becoming overtaking or anything. It never overtakes. I mean, I enjoy. It's difficult physically to do, but I enjoy going into it. In a way, it's therapeutic. I mean, that is part of. I believe most performers, that they may not agree, that there is always a part of it that is people working shit out on stage. At least many of the ones I know, and that it's this idea of like having to go through it and as a therapy almost of figuring out who you are, saying stuff, So, but I don't get lost in it. If that was the question. Yeah.
I know in the case of Miss Beige, from some of the conversations that I've had with her alter ego, Anna Smith, that it has affected her trajectory, her growth as an artist in a lot of ways, because she didn't expect Miss Beige to connect so strongly with people as it has, and where she's getting invited to museums and galleries and to perform, and it's created a very strong connection with a lot of people that I don't think she was expecting or looking for. It came about very naturally. So I think that she's aware that this alter ego has created a shift. Her life was going along this way, and then it shifted a little bit. She can hit me if I'm wrong, but I think
doesn't seem like she's going to hit you.
She has a hammer in her
I know.
bag.
I thought it was a hatchet, actually, but it's a hammer. Did that answer your question? Yeah? Okay.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon. I apologize for my Spanish. I have a question for Michael, the filmmaker. Your film, Sound of Silence, does it remind you perhaps a little bit of the Coppola's Conversation, the film? Do you know that film, Coppola's Conversation? Did it help you to improve your film or not?
Yeah, I caught the last part of that conversation.
A film by Coppola called The Conversation, a wonderful film from the 70s.
Yeah, I love that film. It's kind of the gold standard for me in terms of films about obsessives. The character in that film happens to also be using sound technology. It's funny. I actually, when I made the short film, which I talked about earlier, I hadn't seen The Conversation, admittedly. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, I suppose, who saw my short, asked me similar questions, and I was, I guess, I was glad that I hadn't at the time, just in terms of production design and the look. That film, also takes place in that great kind of gold standard of cinema, the 70s, which had a great look, and the production design of that film is phenomenal. So I was glad that it didn't influence me directly. Surely, in developing the feature, obviously it's a much different story, and I wanted to make something unique. But I definitely went to Harry Call's lab from that movie to look at here's the equipment he used, and how can we kind of like playfully give a nod to that in the look of our film. So it also has the score by David Shire of that film was very much present on our set. There's just a certain quality of kind of like descent into madness that I was thinking about more thematically. But yeah, it's hopefully I would love at some point there to be kind of a double feature with that film in mind. Two different very kind of points of view on sound, but how sound is again influencing us and how it affects our lives.
You should try to see the film today if you can. Esta tarde, si tienes tiempo. Sí.
This afternoon, if you...
Los directors.
And one question for both film directors. You are very young people. What do you prefer? What do you think about critics or the audience? What do you prefer to? Who do you prefer to like your movie? Could critics and the audience be doppelgänger, one of each other?
This is a question for you guys.
So the translation I heard is do we prefer the reception, or do we consider more important the audience or the critic?
Critics.
And are they a doppelganger for each other?
That's a good question.
I think that one silver lining to the accessibility of and sort of a distorted definition of what a journalist is, and how democratized the sense of a critic is now, is that the line is probably blurred much more than it had been in the past, and that there's such an extensive, almost maddening potential obscurity to what one would consider a critic. It's possible now for one to value most the critic who more resembles a micro-budget filmmaker, but in the realm of journalism. So much so that that division and the sense of inaccessibility or prestige is a little confused in a way that I prefer. But I don't, personally, the work I admire most is blind to reception. It's a result of an inner impulse that's not voluntary. There's a sentence that I often think of in my favorite novelist's book, where the narrator says, "And I realized that what I most require of a work of art is that its agenda, is that the word I want? Not include me." And so, for me, that's a credo that I adhere to.
But it's true that, you know, your work your career as an artist is really affected by what's appreciated in your lifetime and what's not appreciated in your lifetime.
Well, you can also, it's the thing that I find now is just there's the access to armchair criticism that is so direct now, and can, you know, it's kind of maddening, but it's bizarre. You go on Twitter and it's like, I hate it, you know, like this crazy, and the critic to me has been, it's a completely different idea of that. It used to be someone who, like a journalist who was schooled in this, you know, it was a different kind of way of looking at it. And now a lot of it, and this is going to be, I find a lot of critics now, or reviewers than critics. It's like more of a review, and a lot of them are failed artists. Many are like failed, you know, or have not been able to be cabaret, and so they start writing about it, and there's so many outlets now. There's these, you know, online magazines, you know, and that's what I have found is the difference. I usually looked for someone who, because bad criticism isn't about like it sucked. It's about the context of what they're, you know, you can in the comparison. They need to know the history of whatever they're talking about. And then it's there's been times where I'm like, oh yeah, they're right, that's interesting, about my own work, you know, it's like, oh yeah, okay. I can eat that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. That it just creates a way of actually analyzing the work. In Spain, at least for film, like really there's, I mean, my experience, their critics they only write about films that are going to be released theatrically. And that seems very unfair as well, and that it's always in this context of how's this film going to work with an audience, and you know, you do want to have more analysis on a deeper level. And like today, we're not going to be able to get into your films on a deeper level, but they all deserve that conversation, and sometimes it's frustrating that there's really not a forum for that.
I think that if I understand you correctly, the inaccessibility of the average Spanish potential audience member has with a more obscure or a film that's not theatrically released is maybe a sort of illusory obstacle for the curious viewer. I think that in a sense, the artist viewer or the active viewer will not be halted by what is a journalistic limitation in their country. I think that it's really easy to maintain a convenient cynicism toward the ease with which people can advertise their criticism online, but that sort of bitterness is ludicrous and doesn't really change the ultimate trajectory of art that's that possesses a vibrancy to endure. I think it's an illusion to think that we will be negatively affected by some sort of government's limitation or the questionable opinions of social media.
Well, it was like he was saying there's so much more access to find films you would never have been able to see. That's the one good side, is there's community now. Like there's all the noise, but then there's people who you get direct to you. Like, this is a film, you know, if they see something online, like, you should see this and that. That was like word of mouth before, literally, by, you know, if you went to the library of your local town and the woman, she's really interesting, you know, which is one thing that's lacking too, is the personal kind of recommendation, you know, like there's something more beautiful about that. But now someone in Madrid can tell somebody in Boston, oh, this film, you should see this one. So that is the upside of all of it, which is great.
Yeah, we'll focus on that upside. Well, I think we're going to wrap up unless anyone else has any other questions or comments. Yeah.
So for the film directors, I was wondering how you how can you be objective in terms of like when you shoot the last shot? How do you think like, okay, this is it? Or aren't you sometimes tempted to like go backwards and try again? Because like if you get so involved, it has to be hard to be objective and like not to try even harder. So I was wondering.
Thank you.
When you say the last shot, are you curious about the finality of the film, when to decide that it's over in shooting? That topic evokes a neurosis that never really ends. There's sort of a pathological tinkering that, in my experience, doesn't conclude. And so, that's a subject I'm still I'm as curious about as you are.
Yeah, I appreciate that kind of philosophical response. The reality, I guess, in my case, of when you're actually in production on a feature, unfortunately it's probably like the least creative time. I mean, there's ups and downs, but usually you're very limited by time. So everything, I find the creative process is usually in the planning. In the case of you're unfortunately on a lot of independent films, but even films, bigger films, you don't necessarily have a lot of time to experiment. So you kind of have to be confident in what you have, because that might be your only chance at it. Certainly in my case, we shot a pretty ambitious movie in 21 days, which is very short for a feature. And a lot of times it's, if it's raining on the day that it was supposed to be sunny, you have to work with that. And, it's the editing becomes the final kind of rewrite of the movie. So you find kind of what works, and hopefully, the things that do stick, and you kind of reassemble it. But yeah, I guess you have to be kind of confident in what you got, and be obsessively about planning for kind of every case scenario. I find is the best practice.
What would you say the average number of takes you shot were?
Depends on the scene. I don't know, but I'm terrible at math and averages. I try to shoot as many takes as possible. I like to kind of have a good kind of wide net in terms of certainly certain scenes that you can do, but some scenes you kind of probably at the very least just have two goes at something sometimes, and have to move. On this movie we were quite literally doing company moves every single day, so there's sometimes not a chance to go back.
What were the scenes you shot the most takes for?
Oh man, that's a good question. Probably things that you wouldn't think of. I'm very meticulous about very micro details. Maybe just like there's a lot of there's a visual motif in the movie, for those who haven't seen it, of tuning forks, and just kind of getting the strikes of those right, and making sure things are sharp and are framed accurately mean a lot to me sometimes. And I feel like hopefully those, are part of the DNA and make the structure of the movie work. But yeah, very, very probably meticulous micro details are the things I usually probably to an unhealthy level spend the most time with.
By the way, that blackout scene was really well done.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah,
I was like, wow.
yeah. It's for a small film. Learning, it's a very getting comfortable with visual effects. Was something very new for me.
Who did that visual effect?
A guy who actually lives in your neighborhood, named Perry Kroll, who's kind of the guru of independent film CGI.
Yeah, he did a great job.
Things, yeah.
That's an ambitious shot for an independent film. New York, blackout of New York City is quite an ambitious shot to make believable.
We use kind of an old Hollywood technique too. It's a combination of visual effects. This is a scene that's being described in the movie where all the power goes out in Manhattan. So creating that illusion without actually waiting for a blackout, but using reference images of, that's living in New York. That's how a blackout looks in New York. That's I've lived through a couple of those now in the city. But the way we shot that was waiting or shooting basically the same setups at dusk before lights come on in buildings, and then kind of superimposing that over the actual dark city, and then going in and scrubbing out every light.
Amazing. And kind of continuing with this filmmaking process, like for you as an actor, when you're directing yourself and the camera's rolling and you say cut while how have you gotten used to this now? Or do you have your doppelganger director hanging out over here telling you what to do?
No. In my first film, I had a smaller role, and the balance with which I could make my participation as an actor and director was much more graceful. In this film, it was a more regrettable sacrifice of certain elements I would have been more fastidious about and would have realized with more exactitude had I not been acting. So I think that the circumstances made my acting a much more challenging department for me, or a much more create a much more difficult balance.
Did your AD have to take on a larger role because of that, or?
No, not necessarily. And I think that was, I think that the extent to which I didn't loosen my grip on direction was part of the conflict.
I vowed I would never direct anything I was in again, and I did it again.
And now you did it, yeah.
I was like, oh, I did it again.
How is it for you? Do you feel very capable of acting and also watching yourself from the outside?
I hated the first or second time I did it, and then that's when I was like, I also vowed I'd never do theater again. Constantly going against my own better judgment. But the soundstage one, I think, was a bit different. Maybe it was because I just had more experience, or it was also I was so alone on stage. I mean, it was me, and Rebecca was always in film. She was never live on stage. I had already directed her, so I could kind of. It wasn't like I had a bunch of people, so I think solo-wise it was a little more doable.
And I feel like in your film, your character is very natural and close to who you are in real life in some ways. And so I wonder, like, when you write it, are you thinking of yourself, or do you see this as another character that's fully developed? Or is it more about the ideas that you're talking about and the language of your film?
I'm probably not the best person to assess the similarities between my character and myself. So there's a sense of I don't think about. Maybe I would respond by saying that my characters are the sole film characters I'm unanalytical about.
Again?
What's that?
Come again?
Like while I would endlessly dissect with with a lot of energy the characters of others. My characters, I'm not analytical concerning, and so they exist in a more involuntary, visceral realm that's devoid of my concern. They, I sort of surrender them to impulse, and I don't. I'm not. I haven't thought much about them. They exist in like in a sort of like a immediate choreography that's not that doesn't include my dissection.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Well, we're going to wrap up. If there's one last question, I think we're at time here. So, any closing comments? Any closing thoughts? I would really encourage you
Beige,
to see. Michael's film plays today at 6 o'clock. Maria, perdón, at 6 o'clock or 6:30.
6:30.
6:30 at the Sala X. And Jay's film plays on Friday, and I don't know what time is Jay. Well, you can look it up on our website. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact time, but Jay's film is on Friday, and Rob's performance is on Sunday at 1 o'clock, and Miss Beige's performance, where she will be speaking and then not speaking, her performance is on Saturday at 8 p.m. In the Plateau, in the Cineteca. Y bueno, voy a pasar al castellano. Muchísimo.
So thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Telefónica for the venue, and I hope to see you at the festival.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.